Welcome to the module PSC2. In this module, we're going to learn about programming in the language C++. Hopefully, you've all participated in PSC, so you know about the basics in C, because C++ is just an enlargement on that language. In fact, if you've done C, then learning how to program in C++ is just like a walk in the park. It makes life so much easier for you. For those who don't know me yet, I'm Ella van der Zande, and when things get settled again, you can find me at Fontes in room 261. Okay, what are we going to do in this module? Well, theory will be given with the help of videos. So on the Teams PSC2 module, you will find videos which will accompany the lessons. And at the end of every video, I will invite you to join me in a Teams meeting where you can ask questions or talk about your assignments. In C++, there are several practical assignments which you may do together or individual, as long as you can be assessed individual. Course materials, so the assignments itself, deadlines, etc., can be found on SharePoint, where you also will find the study guide and some example projects. Assessment is quite simple. You have some individual practicals. You can make them together, but you should be able to explain them to me individual. So you demonstrate them, you explain them. I will ask you to make some small changes to the programs you made, and I will check your overall knowledge of C++. Okay, C++ is a language which was already developed in 1983. So C++ is in fact just a successor of C, and C was already developed in 1972, and it's a hybrid language. So if we look at the language Java, which is developed in 1995, Java is in fact also based on C, but there you can only work in an object-oriented way. So with everything you have to do, you have to define classes, make objects from that classes. In the beginning, it was even so strict. If you wanted to work with an integer in Java, you first had to make an object called int. Well, C++ is a hybrid language. So you can work with objects, you can make classes, you have inheritance, operator overloading, whatever you like, but you can also still benefit from the useful low-level elements from the language C. If we look at C, then basically the inner part of C++ is still C. So you can do still printfs, you can still have bit operations, you can work with files in the way C did. But on top of it, there is a sort of a layer built where you have your classes, your I/O streaming, you can have templates, all kinds of nice features. If we look at what kind of applications will be built with C++, well, C++ is more used for the end user programming and for the less critical software parts. If you really think about embedded with memory and speed limitations, then most of it will still be done with C. Last period, we had someone from ASML helping us with the language C, and in fact, they still worked well for 80% with the language C and for 20% now with the language C++ in their big applications. For a book, we would advise you to use Geddes, but of course there are several learning possibilities, and also Tutorial Point is a very good help for learning C++. Most important is, of course, you make your assignments and you practice with it. And the only way to learn a new programming language is working with it, encountering the problems, the possibilities, the challenges. Okay, let's give it a go. So, first program. And if I look at my C programming skills, and this is a program I could have made in the C environment. So just the main, no parameters, which we indicate with void, and then just a simple printf hello world And remember, there was a strange thing here which was called new line. Please make sure you start for the next line on a new line. This thing is still possible in C++. So everything you could do before, you can still do. You can still have printfs, you still have your strange backslashes with an N or a T or whatever you want to do. If you will think about the specifics in C++, what is added is the possibility to have IOStream in a more simple, elegant way. So if we look at the IOStream in C++, you have to do an include IOStream, and then you can use all sorts of things like cout, and cout stands for console out. You have a strange thing here called end line. So instead of the \n, we can now just put a symbolic end line in. And then there is something in front of these things, std, and that is because C++ works with namespaces. And a namespace is just a combination of includes of possible functions you can use. And for instance, IOStream, but also memory, string header files, they are all combined in the standard namespace. So if you want to use something from those space, you just add standard in front of it, and then you can use anything which is defined in that space. If you say, well, I don't want to put in standard all the way, then a different option would be to say in front of your program using namespace std standard. And that means that now all those standard functions which are defined in that namespace and encapsulated in that namespace can be used without the std in front of it. So now we can just see cout, hello world, again something out, and line. And those symbols are just a direction. So hello world should go to output. So it goes in that direction. You can also do input in the same efficient, simple way. So let's just start by using namespace standard. And then we can have an integer or a float or whatever you could do in C, you can still use. We have a standard command cin, console input. And then of course we go into the variable and we'll just use the variable we want to have the value stored into. And you can put in any variable you like. So it could be an integer or a float or whatever. The cin will accommodate this for you. This same x can then be used to print to the screen. So put something on the screen in that direction. Literally, you entered, and then here we have the translation of the x you put in as an input parameter. Okay, a somewhat bigger example. So I have an integer int number, I have float number, and I tell the user, could you please input the first number? So cout, could you please input the first number? And then I want to get this first number with a cin. So if the user now entered 7, the 7 would be placed in this int variable. And so I have an int number, and after the cin, the value of int number contains 7. Then we have cout, input second number, and then apparently I've reserved space for a float number. So let's make it a little bit bigger. So if the user now enters 3 or 3.4, whatever, this will be stored in this spot here. And then I tell him you've entered 7 and 3.4. Okay, this looks quite straightforward, but will it work? Well, if I ask you this question, then probably there is something wrong with it. Please take a moment to think about it. What could possibly go wrong here? Okay, let's see if we can figure this out. So let's say the user entered as a first number 7.3. The cin wants to store an integer because the first one is space for an integer. And then C++ is very friendly for you. They'll say, okay, I read from input as long as I can still interpret this as an integer. So if I enter 7.3, I will read 7. If I enter 234.12, I will read 234. So he will read as much as possible until he says, and now it's not an integer anymore. Okay, then what happens with the second part, input second number? There is still some part left in my buffer. So in the first situation, I still have 0.3 left. And in the second situation, I have 0.12 left. And that means that the system will not ask you for a new input. You will just say input first number, you give a 7.3, you say cout input second number, and immediately will get in this float number the value 0.3. So the cout would be you entered 7 and 0.3. So apparently the buffer is not cleared after you read an integer. And that's what you should take care of. And a possible solution, for instance, would be this statement, getLine cin garbage. So what happens here is after you've read something from input, then you just say and remove all the rest which is in the same line. And then I have to give it some storage space. So I've defined a string named garbage. I won't use it at all to get rid of the remaining parts in the buffer. So if I run this program and I enter 7.3, then indeed the first one will be 7. And then for the second one, I need to enter a new number, for instance 4.2. Then in this float number, we will get 4.2. Okay, on the previous slide, you already saw that we introduced a variable garbage of the type string. But in C, we don't even have a string. We only can work with char arrays. In C+, we have a lot of predefined types, classes, and one of them is strings. We'll tell you more about that in the next video.